A 130-year-old deed destroyed everything the HOA claimed when I inherited a 3,200-acre lake in Montana. I thought I was coming home to peace. Instead, an HOA president pulled into my driveway and demanded decades of lake fees on water my family had owned for generations. At first, it sounded ridiculous. Then I found my grandfather's warning hidden in an old lockbox. They'll come for the water. What started as a stack of fake violations led to a buried pipeline, missing money, and a secret powerful enough to shake an entire community. Stay with me, because every time I thought I understood what was happening, the truth got bigger. And if you enjoy stories about ordinary people standing their ground with facts, patience, and the law, consider subscribing and joining us for the journey. The gravel cracked beneath my tires as I turned off Highway 83 and rolled onto Mercer Lake Road for the first time in 11 years. Some places change when you're gone. This place hadn't. The same wooden gate stood beside the road. The same weathered sign read, Mercer Lake Property. The same line of pines stretched toward the water like silent guards that had been standing watch long before I was born. I slowed my truck and looked beyond the trees. 3,200 acres of water flashed silver under the morning sun. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. My grandfather, Walter Mercer, had passed away 6 weeks earlier. The funeral was small. The paperwork wasn't. For nearly a month, I'd been buried under estate documents, legal filings, and the endless mess that follows death. By the time everything settled, one fact remained. The lake was mine now, not just the cabin, not just the shoreline. The entire lake, every acre of water, every stretch of shoreline, everything. I parked beside the old cabin and stepped out. The air smelled exactly the way I remembered. Pine sap, lake water, old wood, no traffic, no meetings. No phone ringing every 5 minutes. After 20 years as a civil engineer managing infrastructure projects across 3 states, silence felt almost unnatural. But I liked it. I walked down toward the dock my great-grandfather had built decades earlier. The boards creaked beneath my boots. The water barely moved. I stood there for a long moment, staring across the lake. This was why my grandfather never sold. Developers had tried. Investors had tried. Even state agencies had approached him over the years. He always said no. Some things are worth more than money. That was his favorite line. At the time, I thought it was stubbornness. Standing there now, I finally understood. A vehicle engine shattered the quiet. I turned. A white Cadillac Escalade was coming down the dirt road. Fast. Too fast. Dust rolled behind it like smoke. The SUV stopped so close to my truck that gravel sprayed against the tires. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Mid-50s. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Perfect blazer. The kind of person who looked completely out of place beside a Montana lake. She carried a clipboard tucked under one arm. Not a fishing rod, not a camera, a clipboard. That told me everything I needed to know. She walked directly toward me. No greeting, no smile, no introduction. "Ethan Mercer?" she asked. The way she said it made it clear she already knew the answer. "That's me." She pulled a thick stack of papers from the clipboard and slapped them onto the hood of my truck. The sound echoed through the clearing. "I am Vanessa Holloway, president of Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association." I looked at the papers, then at her, then back at the papers. "What exactly is this?" "Violation notices." Her tone was casual, almost bored, like she'd delivered hundreds of them. I picked up the stack. There were dozens of pages, highlighted sections, red stamps, amounts due, deadlines, threats, The first page claimed I owed over $38,000. I actually laughed. You're kidding. Vanessa didn't laugh. Those fees represent years of unpaid lake access assessments, environmental maintenance contributions, shoreline management fees, and administrative penalties. I looked at her, then looked at the lake behind me, then back at her. I'm sorry. I held up the paperwork. You think I owe lake access fees? Correct. I waited for the punchline. It never came. Vanessa. I pointed toward the water. My family owns this lake. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind people use when they think they're talking to someone stupid. Ownership claims don't exempt residents from community obligations. Residents? Lake-adjacent property owners. I stared at her. The confidence was unbelievable. You understand that my family owned this lake before your HOA existed, right? Our records show the lake is managed under community authority. I almost laughed again. Almost. Instead, I felt something colder settling into my chest, because Vanessa wasn't bluffing. People bluff differently. They hesitate. They over-explain. They get defensive. Vanessa looked completely convinced. Like she'd repeated this story so many times, she actually believed it. Who told you that? I asked. Our legal department. Your legal department. Correct. I nodded slowly. And your legal department believes my grandfather paid these fees? Her eyes shifted briefly. Just enough for me to notice. No. What? The previous owner consistently refused compliance. That caught my attention. Refused. Not forgot. Not missed. Refused. Which meant my grandfather had received these notices for years, maybe decades, and ignored every one of them. How long have you been sending these? Vanessa crossed her arms. The association has maintained lake oversight for many years. That wasn't an answer. It was a dodge. I looked down at the paperwork again. Environmental fees, lake maintenance fees, water management fees, access fees. The numbers stretched back years. Whoever created these documents expected me to panic. Instead, one question kept growing louder inside my head. If my grandfather never paid, why did they keep sending them? Vanessa checked her watch. You have 14 days. For what? To submit payment. And if I don't? Her smile returned. The same cold smile. The association will begin lien proceedings and legal enforcement. The words hung in the air. I looked at the woman threatening legal action against the owner of a 3,200-acre lake. Then I looked at the stack of paperwork. Then I looked at the water. Something wasn't adding up. Not even close. Vanessa turned and walked back toward her SUV. Halfway there, she stopped. One final shot. Mr. Mercer. I didn't answer. The previous owner made the mistake of thinking this issue would disappear. She opened her door. It didn't. Then she got inside and drove away. The dust lingered long after the vehicle disappeared. I stood there alone beside my truck. The lake stretched quietly behind me. The paperwork felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the threats, not because of the money, because of one simple fact. My grandfather had fought this battle before me, and somehow, despite owning the entire lake, he had never managed to stop them. I looked down at the first page again. $38,000. Lake access fees. For my own lake. The anger finally arrived. Slow, controlled, dangerous. I gathered every notice and carried them toward the cabin. Because before I paid $1, before I called a lawyer, before I called the sheriff, I wanted to know one thing. Why would an HOA dare fine the man who owned the entire lake? The answer wasn't sitting inside Vanessa Holloway's paperwork. It was somewhere inside the cabin. I spread the notices across my grandfather's kitchen table. The stack looked worse under proper light. Violation notices, late fees, environmental assessments, shoreline compliance penalties. The dates stretched back years, then decades. I started sorting them. Newest on one side, oldest on the other. An hour later, a pattern emerged. Every notice came from Lakeshore Estates, HOA. Every notice demanded payment. Every notice had been ignored. Not challenged. Not negotiated. Ignored. My grandfather had never paid $1, and somehow the HOA had never forced the issue. That bothered me. If they truly believed they had authority, why stop at letters? Why no lawsuit? Why no liens? Why no court orders? The answer had to be hidden somewhere in the records. I spent the afternoon searching. The cabin contained 40 years of paperwork, tax receipts, property surveys, utility records, fishing permits, insurance policies. My grandfather saved everything. The more I searched, the more one fact became obvious. He hadn't been careless. He'd been preparing. Preparing for something. Near sunset, I climbed into the attic. The space smelled of dust and old cedar. Boxes lined the walls. Most were labeled in my grandfather's neat handwriting. I worked methodically. Farm records, boat registrations, old photographs. Nothing explained the HOA. Then I found a small metal lockbox shoved behind a stack of fishing gear. The box was rusted around the edges. No lock, no label, just a dented steel container that looked like it had been hidden intentionally. My pulse picked up. I carried it downstairs. The moment I opened it, I knew I'd found something important. The box was packed with envelopes. Every one of them bore the Lakeshore Estates logo. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some had been opened. Others remained sealed. Across many of them, my grandfather had written the same word in black marker. Rejected. I sat down and started reading. The oldest notice was nearly 20 years old. The language was almost identical to Vanessa's. Lake management fees, environmental oversight charges, water access contributions. The numbers changed. The threats changed. The story never did. The HOA had been demanding money from my grandfather for 2 decades, and every single time, he refused. I kept digging through the box. Near the bottom, beneath the notices, I found a folded piece of paper. Not official, not typed, handwritten. The moment I recognized my grandfather's writing, I stopped breathing. The note contained only one sentence. Ethan, if anything happens to me, check the deed. The real deed. They'll come for the water. Grandpa. I read it twice, then a third time. The water. Not the cabin, not the shoreline, not the land. The water. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. My grandfather wasn't warning me about property taxes. He wasn't warning me about neighbors. He was warning me about something specific, something valuable, something people wanted badly enough to spend 20 years chasing. I looked back into the box. Beneath the note sat a thick envelope sealed with brittle tape. Unlike the HOA notices, this envelope carried no markings. I carefully opened it. Inside was another packet of documents, much older. The paper felt different, heavier. Some pages looked like copies, others appeared original. Survey maps, boundary drawings, property descriptions, legal language I didn't immediately recognize. One document caught my attention. Its date. I frowned. That couldn't be right. The cabin wasn't that old. Neither were the docks. But the document clearly referenced Mercer Lake. I spread the papers across the table. The more I looked, the stranger things became. Several records referenced water rights. Others referenced watershed boundaries. One included hand-drawn markings extending far beyond the shoreline. The package looked less like a property file and more like a legal history. And suddenly, Vanessa's confidence made a little more sense. Not because she was right, because she was chasing something. Something hidden inside these papers. Something my grandfather had spent years protecting. I grabbed my phone and took photographs of every page. The sun had disappeared completely by the time I finished. The cabin sat silent around me. The lake beyond the window looked black. Still. Watching. I stared at my grandfather's note again. Check the deed. The real deed. Not a deed. The deed. As if there were more than one. As if the document everyone believed mattered wasn't the one that actually did. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Tomorrow I needed answers. Real answers. Not from Vanessa. Not from the HOA. From someone who understood land law. Someone who could tell me why my grandfather spent 20 years refusing these demands. And why his final warning wasn't about money. It was about water. Because one thing was becoming painfully clear. Vanessa Holloway wasn't trying to collect old fees. She was trying to get control of something my grandfather had guarded until the day he died. And I was starting to suspect she wasn't the only one interested in it. What exactly had my grandfather been protecting all these years? The next morning, I loaded the documents into a folder and drove into town. There was one person I trusted to tell me the truth, even if I didn't like the answer. Sheriff Cole Bennett. His office sat exactly where it had for as long as I could remember. The building was older than most of the businesses around it. Cole was older than the building. At least that's what everyone joked. When I walked through the door, he looked up from his desk and immediately frowned. Ethan Mercer. Morning, Sheriff. Hell of a way to come back home. I sat down and dropped the folder onto his desk. His eyes moved from me to the stack of HOA notices. Then his expression hardened. Vanessa got to you already. That wasn't a question. You knew she would? I would have bet money on it. That got my attention. Cole leaned back in his chair and opened the folder. The first few pages were enough. He didn't need to read further. I've seen these before. The notices? He nodded. Hundreds of them. I felt my stomach tighten. Hundreds? Over the years. He tossed the paperwork back onto the desk. Different names. Different properties. Same game. The room suddenly felt smaller. She's been doing this that long. Longer. I sat forward. If she's issuing fake fees, why hasn't anyone stopped her? Cole gave a humorless laugh. Because most people don't have 3,200 acres and a family history tied to the lake. I didn't like where this was going. The sheriff opened a drawer and removed a yellow legal pad. Several names were written on it. He slid it toward me. Recognize any of them? I didn't. Who are they? Former residents. The list was longer than I expected. Families, couples, retirees, people who had lived around the lake. What happened to them? They fought. I looked up and they lost. The words landed hard. Lost how? Cole folded his arms. Vanessa doesn't usually take people to court. She doesn't need to. Then what does she do? Pressure. He said the word carefully. Violation notices, compliance inspections, endless fines, complaints, letters from attorneys. The pattern sounded familiar, because I'd already received the first round. Most folks eventually give up. Give up what? Their property. I stared at him. Cole pointed toward the window. People retire here because they want peace. They don't want lawsuits. His jaw tightened. When the pressure gets high enough, they sell. And Vanessa benefits? Every time. A silence settled between us. The pieces weren't fitting together yet. But they were starting to form a picture. I reached into the folder and handed him my grandfather's note. Cole read it. Once, then again. His eyes narrowed. They'll come for the water. You ever hear him say anything like that? The sheriff thought for a moment. Your grandfather never talked much. That was true, but he hated one thing. What? People treating the lake like it belonged to them. The answer hit harder than I expected, because that was exactly what Vanessa was doing. I slid the century-old documents across the desk. These came from a lockbox. Cole examined the first page, the second, then the third. His expression changed. Not shock. Recognition. You've seen these before. The sheriff looked up slowly. Not these exact documents, but I've heard rumors. The tension in my chest tightened. What kind of rumors? Cole lowered his voice. The kind that make people nervous. I waited. Years ago, some developers tried buying access rights around the lake. My pulse picked up. And they failed. Because of my grandfather? Cole nodded. Your grandfather fought every one of them. That tracked. Walter Mercer never sold anything. Ever. But here's the part that bothered people. The sheriff tapped the old papers. He always acted like there was something bigger attached to the lake. I thought about the note, the real deed, the water. Everything pointed back to the same thing. What if there is? Cole looked directly at me. Then Vanessa isn't chasing fees. I felt the shift immediately. The conversation wasn't about HOA harassment anymore. It was about motive. If she isn't after fees, I asked quietly, what is she after? The sheriff didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened another drawer. Inside sat a stack of HOA notices, more than 20 of them. Different names, different years, same logo, same language, same threats. He slid them across the desk. Look at the category. I did. Every single notice contained one common charge: lake access, water usage, environmental management, water. Again, always water. I looked up. Cole's expression was grim. That's why I said she picked the wrong Mercer. What do you mean? Because everyone else paid. The room went quiet. Everyone else paid. Every resident. Every homeowner. Every person living around the lake. For years. Maybe decades. My eyes moved across the stack. A question formed instantly. If everyone paid, where did all that money go? The question followed me all the way back to the lake. By the time I reached the cabin, I had already made up my mind. I needed someone who understood property law better than I did. Someone who could tell me whether the documents in my grandfather's lockbox were valuable or explosive. The next morning, I drove to Helena and walked into the office of Rachel Dawson. If you owned land in Montana and found yourself fighting over water rights, Rachel Dawson was the person people called. And if Rachel Dawson agreed to take your case, it usually meant someone else was about to have a very bad month. She looked through the documents in silence. The silence lasted longer than I liked. 5 minutes. 10. 15. She didn't ask questions. didn't make comments, didn't even look up. She just kept reading. Finally, she sat back. Then she read the oldest document again. A second time. That got my attention. Rachel? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid one of the pages toward me. Where exactly did you find this? My grandfather's lockbox. Her eyes narrowed. Good. What do you mean? Because if this came from anywhere else, I'd assume it was forged. My stomach tightened. What is it? Rachel leaned forward. Ethan, do you know what you inherited? A lake. She shook her head. No. Then she tapped the document. You inherited power. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or worry. She pointed to a paragraph written in faded legal language. This is an original water rights grant. I stared at the page. So? Rachel actually smiled. The first smile I'd seen from her. So, this document predates modern county regulations. I frowned. Meaning? It predates the HOA. That doesn't sound surprising. It also predates nearly every subdivision around the lake. That got my attention. Rachel opened another file, then another, then another. She started arranging documents across her desk. Survey maps, boundary descriptions, historic filings, water use records. The picture slowly came together, and it was bigger than I expected. Much bigger, Ethan. Rachel pointed at the maps. Your family doesn't just own shoreline property. I know. No, you don't. She placed her finger on the lake itself, then traced outward. The watershed, the inlets, the outlet channels, the surrounding shoreline. Everything. The Mercer family owns the original water rights. I blinked, then blinked again. All of them? Rachel nodded. Every one. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. Legally speaking, the HOA has no authority over that lake. I stared at her. No authority? None. What about environmental oversight? No. Access regulations? No. Usage fees? Rachel almost laughed. Absolutely not. The room suddenly felt different, lighter. Not because the problem was solved, because for the first time, I knew something Vanessa didn't think I knew. The law was on my side. Rachel continued flipping through the documents. Then she stopped. Her expression changed. What is it? She handed me one of the HOA notices. Look at this. I did. Nothing stood out immediately. Then she pointed to a paragraph. The notice claimed the HOA maintained legal jurisdiction over lake management activities. I looked up. Rachel's eyes hardened. That's false. Completely? Completely. I felt anger rising. Every fee, every threat, every violation, all of it built on a claim that legally didn't exist. Rachel wasn't finished. She grabbed a legal pad and started making notes. The bigger question isn't whether they're wrong. It's why they're willing to be wrong. I sat forward. What do you mean? Ethan, people don't fabricate authority for 20 years by accident. The words landed hard. Because she was right. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Vanessa wasn't confused. The HOA wasn't making clerical errors. Someone had deliberately built an entire system around a lie. And according to Sheriff Bennett, residents had been paying into that system for years. Rachel looked down at the stack of notices. How often did they contact your grandfather? Constantly. And he never paid? Not once. She nodded slowly. Then your grandfather knew exactly what these documents meant. The realization hit me like a punch. Walter Mercer hadn't ignored the HOA because he was stubborn. He ignored them because he knew they were bluffing. The entire time. Rachel pulled one final document from the packet. An old survey map, older than the rest. She studied it carefully, then looked back at me. Ethan. Her voice had changed. What? I think the water is the key. I felt my pulse quicken. My grandfather's note said the same thing. She nodded. Because nobody spends 20 years chasing a lake they can't legally control unless the lake gives them something valuable. The room went quiet. Water, rights, money. 20 years of pressure. 20 years of fees. 20 years of threats. Suddenly they all pointed in the same direction. Not toward property. Toward profit. Rachel closed the folder. I'm filing a formal legal challenge. How soon? Today. I felt something I hadn't felt since Vanessa stepped out of that SUV. Confidence. Real confidence. Because for the first time, the facts were clear. The HOA had no jurisdiction, no legal authority, no lawful claim, which meant every fee they'd collected rested on a lie. But one question remained, and it bothered me more than ever. If Vanessa knew she had no authority, why was she so desperate to control the water? I got my first answer less than 24 hours after Rachel filed the legal challenge. They came in a convoy, 3 county trucks, 1 environmental vehicle, 1 code enforcement SUV, and a building inspector's pickup. I was drinking coffee on the cabin porch when they rolled onto the property. The timing was impossible to ignore. Rachel had filed the challenge yesterday. The inspectors showed up today. I walked down to meet them before they reached the dock. A man wearing a county vest stepped forward. Mr. Mercer? That's me. He held up a clipboard. We received multiple complaints regarding environmental violations, shoreline safety concerns, and unpermitted structures. I almost laughed. All at the same time. His expression told me he wasn't enjoying this any more than I was. I'm just here to investigate. That answer was honest enough. Then investigate. The next 3 hours were a disaster for whoever filed the complaints. The environmental officer inspected erosion controls. No violations. The building inspector examined the dock. No violations. Code enforcement checked setbacks and shoreline structures. No violations. Everything passed. Every single thing. I followed them the entire time. Not arguing, not interfering, recording, taking notes, collecting names, collecting dates, collecting evidence. Because every clean inspection created a paper trail, and paper trails win legal fights. Near noon, I overheard something interesting. The environmental officer was speaking quietly with the building inspector near the shoreline. This doesn't match the report. I kept walking as if I hadn't heard, but my attention sharpened instantly. The other inspector nodded. Not even close. The officer glanced around before continuing. The complaint described active shoreline damage. He looked at the lake, then at the reinforced bank, then back at his clipboard. There isn't any. The building inspector shook his head. Same with the dock. That was all I needed. The complaints weren't mistaken. They were fabricated. By the time the inspectors finished, their mood had changed completely. They arrived expecting violations. They were leaving with questions. The lead inspector approached me before getting back into his truck. Mr. Mercer. Yeah? You may want to keep records of everything. I smiled. Already doing it. He nodded. Good. Then he left. 10 minutes later, another vehicle appeared. This one I recognized. Sheriff Cole Bennett. He climbed out before the patrol truck fully stopped. "Tell me something." I crossed my arms. "Depends." The sheriff looked toward the departing county vehicles. "Did 3 departments just inspect your property?" "Every one of them." His jaw tightened. "Damn." "What?" Cole pulled out his phone. Dispatch traced the complaints. My pulse quickened. "And?" "They came from the same source." I stared at him. "The same source." He nodded. "Same phone number." The silence lasted a moment, then another. The implication was obvious. Someone had filed multiple complaints under different categories, hoping one would stick. Someone was trying to create pressure. The sheriff didn't need to say the name. We were both thinking it. Vanessa Holloway. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "Not yet." The answer wasn't ideal, but it was enough. Because now I knew something important. The HOA wasn't reacting. They were attacking. Rachel arrived an hour later. I handed her copies of the inspection reports. She read them quickly, then smiled. A dangerous smile. "These help." "How much?" "A lot." She tapped the reports. "Every clean inspection weakens their position." "What if they keep filing complaints?" "They probably will." I wasn't surprised. Rachel gathered the paperwork into a folder. Then she froze. Her eyes locked onto one of the HOA notices sitting on the kitchen table. "What?" She picked it up. "Read it." Then read it again. The wording. I frowned. "What about it?" She pointed to a paragraph. The notice referenced environmental instability and water management concerns. Almost identical language to the county complaints. The same phrases, the same terminology, the same claims. Rachel looked up slowly. "This is coordinated." I felt my stomach tighten. "You think Vanessa wrote the complaints?" "I think whoever wrote the complaints also wrote these notices." The distinction mattered, because suddenly the conflict wasn't just about fake fees. Someone was building a narrative. Environmental danger, lake management, water control. The same themes kept appearing, over and over, almost as if someone needed official justification to take authority over the lake. Rachel closed the folder. "Ethan." "What?" "People don't spend this much effort creating false environmental problems unless they're hiding a real one." I thought about my grandfather's note. "They'll come for the water." The sentence hit differently now, because every attack seemed connected to the same thing. Not property, not the cabin, not the shoreline, the water. And if someone was willing to mobilize inspectors, fabricate complaints, and risk legal exposure to gain control of it, then whatever they were hiding had to be valuable. Very valuable. The question was no longer whether someone was targeting the lake. The question was who. And more importantly, who was feeding false reports to the county? The answer didn't come from paperwork. It came from the lake itself. 2 mornings later, I left the cabin before sunrise carrying equipment I hadn't touched in years. Survey tools, flow sensors, pressure monitors. The same kind of equipment I'd used throughout my engineering career. Rachel's theory kept replaying in my head. People don't invent environmental problems unless they're hiding a real one. If someone wanted control of the water, then the water would tell me why. I started on the eastern shoreline. My grandfather's old maps were spread across the passenger seat of my truck. Hand-drawn notes filled the margins. Measurements, coordinates, references to structures that no longer appeared on modern county maps. Most people would have ignored them. I didn't. Because one location appeared repeatedly. a place labeled only as Flow Control Site 1. The coordinates led me nearly a mile from the cabin. The trail was overgrown, untouched, which made sense. Almost nobody knew it existed. The structure appeared suddenly between the trees, an iron valve assembly, half buried in brush. Ancient, massive, built long before modern developments surrounded the lake. I crouched beside it. A faded metal plate was still attached. Mercer Water System, 1894. My pulse jumped. This wasn't just a valve. It was infrastructure. Proof that my family had actively managed the lake generations before the HOA existed. I cleared away debris and began installing sensors. The first readings looked normal. Water pressure, flow rate, ground saturation. Everything matched what I'd expect from a healthy mountain lake. Then the second set of readings appeared. I frowned. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The pressure graph showed a consistent draw, not natural drainage, not seasonal movement. Water was leaving the lake, continuously, in significant volume. I recalibrated the equipment, ran the measurements again. Same result. The draw was real. Someone was removing water. A lot of it. I stood slowly. The silence around me suddenly felt different. My grandfather's note echoed in my head. They'll come for the water. Maybe they already had. I spent the next 3 hours following the readings. Each new measurement strengthened the pattern. The water wasn't disappearing randomly. It was being directed, pulled, moved. The pressure signatures pointed toward the western side of the lake, toward private development land. Toward property my grandfather had marked repeatedly on old maps. As I checked another reading station, a voice interrupted me. "You've got the same look he used to get." I turned. An older woman stood near the shoreline holding a tackle box. I recognized her immediately. Grace Hollowell, one of the few people around the lake who'd known my grandfather longer than I had. "Grace." She smiled. "Haven't seen you since you were a teenager." I looked at the equipment, then at her. "You knew my grandfather came out here." "Knew it." She laughed softly. "I came with him half the time." That got my attention. I pointed toward the old valve. "What was he monitoring?" Her expression faded. "The lake." "Why?" Grace looked across the water. "Because he stopped trusting people." That wasn't the answer I expected. "What people?" Her eyes narrowed. "Developers." I felt the pieces beginning to move. "Any specific developer?" The pause lasted just long enough. Then she nodded. "Bradley Pierce." The name meant something. Not much, but enough. I knew Pierce owned a luxury resort on the western side of the lake. Expensive cabins, private docks, vacation rentals, money, a lot of money. What happened between them? Grace shook her head. "Your grandfather never told me everything. But I heard enough." I waited. Bradley wanted access. Access to what? Her eyes moved to the water. That answer told me everything. The lake, the water, the same thing everyone seemed interested in. Did my grandfather stop him? For years. A chill moved through me. Because if Bradley Pierce had been fighting for access years ago, then Vanessa's actions suddenly looked very different. The HOA might not be acting alone. I checked another sensor. The readings spiked immediately. My stomach tightened. The strongest pressure drop I'd seen all day was directly beneath us. I followed the line on my map. West. Always west. Toward Bradley Pierce's property. toward the resort, toward something hidden. Grace saw my expression. What did you find? I looked at the graph, then at the lake, then back at the numbers. Someone's pulling water. Her face went pale. How much? I showed her the readings. She didn't understand the technical details. She didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. A commercial scale draw, not a homeowner, not irrigation. Something larger, much larger. When I finally returned to the cabin, Rachel was waiting. I handed her the data. She studied the charts, then looked up sharply. Ethan. What? These extraction levels aren't legal. The words landed hard. You're sure? Completely. She pointed at the pressure curves. This isn't accidental loss. It isn't natural. No. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Someone built a system. A system. The words echoed in my mind, because suddenly everything connected. The fake environmental complaints, the HOA pressure, the lake fees, the 20 years of intimidation. Someone wasn't trying to manage the lake. Someone was using it, and if the data was right, they were taking far more water than anyone should. I looked toward the western shoreline visible through the cabin window, toward Bradley Pierce's resort, toward the place every pressure reading seemed determined to point. The question was no longer whether someone was stealing water. The question was where the stolen water was going. The next morning, I went looking for the answer. Rachel spent the day digging through public records while I returned to the western side of the lake with my equipment. The pressure readings from the day before hadn't been random. They formed a path, a trail, and every measurement pushed me closer to Bradley Pierce's resort. By noon, I found something. Not the pipeline itself, evidence of it. Fresh ground disturbance hidden beneath a line of decorative shrubs. A maintenance access cover partially concealed behind a utility shed. The kind of thing most people would walk past without noticing. I didn't. I removed the cover and stared. A large industrial water line disappeared into the ground below. New construction, modern materials, commercial grade. My pulse jumped. This wasn't some old agricultural system. Someone had spent serious money building it. I photographed everything. Measurements, pipe markings, serial numbers, installation dates. Then I called Rachel. Found something? More than something. 20 minutes later, she arrived. The moment she saw the pipe, she understood. This is huge. How huge? Rachel crouched beside the access point, big enough that nobody installs it without permits. And if they don't have permits? Her eyes met mine. Then somebody has a problem. I wasn't expecting Sheriff Bennett to arrive an hour later. Apparently, Rachel had called him. He spent less than 30 seconds looking at the installation. Then his expression darkened. That shouldn't be here. I folded my arms. You recognize it? Not the pipe. What then? The location. That got my attention. Cole pointed toward the resort. Bradley Pierce requested utility expansion permits around here 2 years ago. And they were denied. The three of us looked at each other. Nobody needed to say it. Denied permits. Hidden water line. Massive extraction. The pieces were fitting together. Rachel opened her briefcase. Then you're going to want to see this. She handed me a folder. Inside were financial records. Not complete records. Enough to raise questions. Large HOA expenditures appeared throughout the reports. Water management consulting, environmental oversight services, lake preservation contracts. The numbers were enormous. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. What companies received these payments? I asked. Rachel flipped several pages. That's the interesting part. She handed me a list. I read the names, then read them again. None sounded familiar. Not one. Rachel already knew my next question. I checked. And? They don't exist. The words hung in the air. No offices, no registrations, no business licenses, no tax records. The silence that followed felt heavier than any confrontation we'd had so far. Because fake companies meant something very specific. Someone was hiding money. Sheriff Bennett took the documents. His jaw tightened with every page. This gets worse. How? Cole pointed toward several transactions. The payments weren't random. They appeared in cycles, quarter after quarter, year after year. The HOA had been sending money somewhere for a long time. Rachel looked toward Bradley Pierce's resort. I think we just found where the residents' lake fees went. I followed her gaze. The resort stretched along the western shoreline. Luxury cabins, private boat docks, expensive landscaping. The kind of development that consumed water. A lot of water. Suddenly the picture became clearer. Residents paid HOA water fees. The HOA sent money to fake contractors. The money disappeared, and somehow a hidden pipeline appeared beneath Bradley Pierce's property. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was getting close. Very close. Then Rachel found the document that changed everything. She pulled a single page from the bottom of the folder. A consulting agreement. At first glance it looked ordinary. Then I noticed the signature. Bradley Pierce. My pulse kicked hard. What is this? Rachel pointed lower. A payment authorization. Approved by Lakeshore Estates HOA, signed by Vanessa Holloway. Nobody spoke. Because now Vanessa wasn't just issuing notices, she was connected. Directly, financially, personally. The sheriff slowly exhaled. Well, I looked at him. Well, what? Cole folded the paper. I think your HOA president just became a lot more interesting. Rachel nodded. The question isn't whether she's involved. It's how involved. The realization landed like a hammer. For weeks, Vanessa had acted like the villain. The person behind the threats, the fines, the inspections, the intimidation. But maybe she wasn't the mastermind. Maybe she was protecting someone else. Someone with deeper pockets. Someone who stood to gain far more than HOA dues. Someone like Bradley Pierce, the resort owner, the developer. The man who had spent years trying to gain access to Mercer Lake. Sheriff Bennett looked toward the hidden pipeline, then toward the resort, then back at me. Ethan. What? I don't think this started as an HOA dispute. Neither did I. Not anymore. Because the evidence pointed somewhere bigger, much bigger. The HOA wasn't collecting fees because they wanted compliance. They were collecting money because somebody needed funding. And the stolen water? That wasn't the goal. It was the product. The thing being sold. The thing making someone rich. I looked at the pipeline disappearing underground toward Bradley Pierce's property. Then at Vanessa's signature sitting on top of the financial records. The answer was finally taking shape. Vanessa Holloway wasn't protecting a neighborhood. She was protecting an operation. The only question left was whether she was running it, or working for the man who was. We didn't have long to wait for an answer. The next morning, Rachel received a notice from the HOA. Not a letter. Not a warning. An emergency meeting announcement. The title sat in bold print across the top of the page. Emergency Community Action Session. Below it was a proposal that made my blood run cold. Temporary HOA control of Mercer Lake. I read it twice, then a third time. The language was carefully written. environmental concerns, water management risks, community protection measures. The same phrases Vanessa had been using since the day she arrived at my property. Only now they were trying to formalize it. Rachel looked up from the notice. They're moving faster than expected. Why? Because they're scared. I wasn't sure I agreed. Scared people hide. Scared people retreat. Vanessa was escalating. Then Sheriff Bennett explained it. They know you're getting close. That made more sense. The legal challenge, the hidden pipeline, the fake contractors, the financial records. The pressure was finally moving in the opposite direction, and they didn't like it. The meeting was scheduled for that evening. Word spread quickly. By sunset, half the community seemed headed toward the Lakeshore Pavilion. Residents, board members, local business owners, even reporters. Apparently, people got interested when rumors of water theft started circulating. Rachel and I arrived together. Sheriff Bennett followed shortly afterward. The room was already packed. Vanessa stood at the front beside a projector screen. She looked confident, almost rehearsed. Large charts covered the walls, environmental graphs, lake-level projections, photographs of shoreline erosion. Every visual pointed toward the same conclusion. The lake was supposedly in danger, and only the HOA could save it. I took a seat near the back. Rachel sat beside me. Neither of us said much. We wanted to hear what Vanessa would do. The meeting started exactly at 7. Vanessa stepped to the microphone. Thank you all for coming. The room quieted. For years, Lakeshore Estates has worked to protect this community. The speech sounded polished, too polished. She clicked to the first slide. A graph appeared. The lake faces increasing environmental pressure. Another slide. Unchecked private control creates serious risks. Another. Emergency intervention may be necessary. I looked around. Some residents appeared confused. Others looked worried. A few seemed convinced. That was the danger. Most people didn't understand water law. Most people assumed authority figures were telling the truth. Vanessa knew that, which was exactly why she was standing at the podium. Then she finally got to the point. The board recommends temporary administrative control of Mercer Lake. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not approval, confusion. Good. People were paying attention. Vanessa continued. The measure would allow the HOA to oversee environmental protection efforts while legal questions are resolved. Rachel leaned toward me. Listen carefully. I knew why. Every word mattered, because every claim she made could later become evidence. Vanessa clicked to another slide. Aerial photographs filled the screen. This lake belongs to the community. There it was. The sentence. The lie. The one she'd been building toward for weeks. I saw Rachel smile. A small smile, but a dangerous one. Because Vanessa had just crossed a line. The microphone squealed briefly as someone stood. Me. Every eye in the room turned. Vanessa's expression tightened instantly. Ethan. I ignored her. Instead, I walked to the front carrying a leather folder, the same folder that held my grandfather's documents. The room grew quiet. Reporters lifted cameras. Residents leaned forward. Vanessa folded her arms. This meeting is for residents. I am a resident. Her jaw tightened. Fair point. I stopped beside the podium, then removed a single document. The original water rights deed. The room watched. Silent. Waiting. I placed it on the table. This document predates the HOA. Nobody spoke. It predates every subdivision around this lake. Still silence. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. And according to this deed, neither you nor your board have any authority over Mercer Lake. The room shifted. People started whispering. Vanessa recovered quickly. That is your interpretation. No. Rachel stood. It's the law. Every head turned toward her. Rachel moved beside me. Calm, precise, dangerous. She held up a certified legal opinion. The Mercer family owns the original water rights, shoreline rights, watershed rights, and access authority. The room became very quiet. Vanessa's confidence flickered. Just for a second. Then it returned. You can debate ownership later. No, Rachel said. We can't. Vanessa frowned. What? Rachel pointed toward the proposal. Because your entire emergency action plan depends on authority you don't legally possess. The room erupted into conversation. Not shouting. Not yet. But the mood had changed. The first crack had appeared. Then I noticed something. A familiar face sitting near the front. Bradley Pierce, the developer. The man connected to the hidden pipeline. The man connected to the financial records. The man who suddenly seemed very interested in an HOA meeting. And when our eyes met, he didn't look surprised to see me. He looked concerned. For the first time since this fight began, I realized something important. Vanessa wasn't acting alone. And before the night was over, everyone in that room was about to learn it too. Because Rachel hadn't come to stop the vote. She had come to destroy the reason it existed. The only question was whether Vanessa would fall apart first, or whether Bradley Pierce would. The answer came faster than I expected. Rachel stepped forward and placed 3 folders on the table beside the podium. Not 1. 3. Each labeled HOA financials, water extraction data, property rights documents. The room quieted immediately. Vanessa saw them and froze. Not dramatically. Just enough. A tiny hesitation. But after weeks of dealing with her, I noticed it. So did Rachel. Before this meeting continues, Rachel said, there are several facts the residents deserve to hear. Vanessa grabbed the microphone. This is not the appropriate forum. It became the appropriate forum when you proposed taking control of property you don't own. The crowd responded with scattered applause. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Rachel opened the first folder. Residents of Lakeshore Estates have paid environmental management fees for years. Heads nodded throughout the room. Everyone knew those fees. Everyone paid them. Rachel held up a financial report. Can anyone tell me what company received those funds? Silence. She wasn't expecting an answer. Neither can we. Now people looked confused. Rachel continued. Because many of the companies receiving HOA payments do not exist. The room shifted. People sat straighter. Conversations stopped. Vanessa tried to interrupt. Rachel didn't let her. She displayed copies of the payment records, fake contractor names, missing registrations, missing tax records, missing business licenses. The evidence spoke for itself. A man near the front stood. I've paid those fees for 8 years. Another resident raised her hand. 12. Someone else shouted. Where did the money go? That question hit the room like a hammer, because suddenly everyone was asking it. Where did the money go? Vanessa stepped forward. These accusations are misleading. Rachel opened the second folder. No. Then she looked directly at Bradley Pierce. They're documented. The developer's expression hardened immediately. Good. He finally understood where this was heading. Rachel handed copies of the financial records to several reporters. Then she turned to the projector. A map appeared. Mercer Lake, the western shoreline, Bradley Pierce's resort, and a highlighted line connecting them. The hidden pipeline. Murmurs spread across the room. Then the murmurs became voices. Then the voices became outrage. What is that? Why is there a pipe? Is that connected to the resort? Rachel waited for the noise to settle. Then she answered, because someone has been removing water from Mercer Lake. The room erupted. Vanessa's face drained of color. Bradley's expression didn't change, but he stopped looking comfortable. I stepped forward. The time for silence was over. For weeks, I said, the HOA claimed I was creating environmental problems. I pointed toward the map. But the environmental problem wasn't me. Then I pointed toward the pipeline. It was that. People started shouting. Questions came from every direction. How long? Who approved it? Who paid for it? Nobody wanted HOA talking points anymore. They wanted answers. Real answers. Rachel opened the third folder. The oldest one. The one containing my grandfather's documents. The original deed rested on top. She held it up. This document predates every HOA bylaw. The room became quiet again. According to state law, Mercer Lake is protected by original water rights grants. Rachel placed the deed on the table. The HOA never had authority over this lake. The silence deepened. People weren't angry anymore. Not in that moment. They were stunned, because everything they'd been told for years suddenly looked different. The rules, the fees, the notices, the warnings, the authority, all of it. Vanessa reached for the microphone. We acted in the community's best interests. Rachel turned toward her, then asked a single question. The question that ended everything. Then show us the environmental report. Vanessa blinked. Nobody moved. Rachel repeated herself. The report. Silence. You based this takeover proposal on environmental danger. Silence. Show us the study. The room watched, waiting. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, looked toward Bradley, then back toward the crowd. No answer came, because there wasn't one. The report didn't exist. The environmental crisis didn't exist. The justification didn't exist. For the first time since I met her, Vanessa Holloway had nothing to say. The room went completely silent. Not confusion, not tension. Real silence. The kind that appears when everyone reaches the same conclusion at exactly the same moment. She lied. Then it broke. Residents stood. Questions became accusations. Accusations became demands. One man waved years of HOA notices in the air. A woman shouted about fees she'd paid for over a decade. Another demanded an audit. Another demanded resignations. The reporters couldn't write fast enough. The cameras never stopped recording. Bradley Pierce finally stood. Bad decision. The moment he did, half the room turned toward him. People recognized him. The developer. The resort owner. The man connected to the pipeline. His attempt to leave only made things worse. Sheriff Bennett stepped directly into his path. Not aggressively. Just enough. Going somewhere? Bradley's jaw tightened. The crowd noticed. Everything was unraveling now. Fast. Rachel leaned toward me. We've got them. I looked around the room. At the residents. At the reporters. At Vanessa. At Bradley. At the deed sitting on the table. For weeks we'd been building evidence, following records, tracking water, connecting financial trails. Now the entire community could see it. The HOA wasn't protecting the lake. They were using it. and the people paying the price had finally figured it out. But one question still remained. A question every resident in that room wanted answered. Exactly how much money had they stolen? The answer arrived 3 days later. State investigators showed up before sunrise. Not one vehicle. 6. By noon, the HOA office was closed. By evening, every HOA account connected to Lakeshore Estates had been frozen. And by the next morning, the story was on every local news station in western Montana. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, mostly because Vanessa and Bradley had left a trail. A very expensive trail. Rachel called me the moment the first forensic accountants finished reviewing the records. "You sitting down?" That was never a good sign. "How bad is it?" There was a pause. Then she answered, "Just over $4.6 million. I stopped talking. 4.6 million. Not fees, not operating expenses, not accounting mistakes. Money. Residents' money. Collected over nearly 2 decades. Moved through fake contractors. Hidden through consulting agreements. Redirected into development projects. And according to the investigators, much of it ended up benefiting Bradley Pierce's resort operations. The outrage that followed was immediate. Residents who had once feared the HOA now lined up outside the county courthouse. Some wanted refunds, others wanted lawsuits, most wanted answers. Sheriff Bennett wanted something simpler: evidence, and evidence kept arriving. The State Environmental Board confirmed the hidden pipeline violated multiple permitting requirements. Engineers traced the line directly from Mercer Lake toward infrastructure supporting Bradley's resort expansion. The extraction data matched my sensor readings almost perfectly. The water theft wasn't a theory anymore. It was documented. Every report strengthened the case. Every document narrowed their options. Vanessa tried to fight. At first, she issued statements, claimed misunderstandings, blamed accountants, blamed consultants, blamed former board members. Then investigators discovered the consulting agreements, the ones carrying her signature, the ones authorizing payments, the ones connecting her directly to Bradley Pierce. After that, the excuses stopped. Bradley lasted slightly longer. Developers always do. He hired attorneys, issued public statements, claimed he acted in good faith. Then the state located communications linking him to the unauthorized water infrastructure. That ended the argument. The legal process took months. The outcome did not. The court ruled that Lakeshore Estates HOA had exceeded its authority for years. The fee structure was declared invalid. The fraudulent contracts were voided. The hidden pipeline was ordered removed. Assets were seized. Records were preserved. And both Vanessa Holloway and Bradley Pierce faced consequences tied directly to the evidence they left behind. The most satisfying moment wasn't in court. It happened later. Much later. After the investigations, after the headlines, after the lawyers finished arguing. The HOA signs came down first. Then the warning notices disappeared. Then the fake lake access restrictions vanished. One by one, the things that had controlled people for years simply stopped existing. The fear disappeared with them. Not long afterward, I announced something that surprised almost everyone. I wasn't going to close the lake. I wasn't going to build gates. I wasn't going to charge residents for access. Because that had never been the point. The point was protecting it. The same thing my grandfather had spent years trying to do. Working with Rachel, county officials, and community representatives, we created the Mercer Lake Conservation Trust, a nonprofit organization. Transparent finances, independent oversight, public reporting, no hidden fees, no private control, no HOA authority. The structure protected the water rights while ensuring the community could continue enjoying the lake responsibly. exactly the way it should have been from the beginning. Grace Hollowell became one of the first board members. Sheriff Bennett accepted an advisory role. Rachel helped draft the legal framework. For the first time in years, people trusted the system because they could actually see it. A few months later, I stood on the same dock where this entire fight had begun. Families were fishing. Kayaks moved across the water. Kids skipped stones along the shoreline. Nobody worried about violation notices. Nobody worried about surprise fees. Nobody worried about Vanessa Holloway or Bradley Pierce. The lake looked the same, but everything around it had changed. I thought about my grandfather, the lockbox, the note, the warning. They'll come for the water. He'd been right. They had come for it, for years. Long before I arrived, long before I understood what he was protecting. But he'd left something behind. Not just a lake, not just a deed, a roadmap, a way to fight back using facts instead of anger, records instead of threats, truth instead of power. Rachel walked onto the dock beside me. Quiet day. That's the goal, she smiled. You know your grandfather would have enjoyed this. I looked across the water. The same water people had spent decades trying to control. The same water that exposed every lie. The same water that ultimately defeated them. Maybe. Rachel laughed softly. That's the closest thing to sentimental I've heard from you. I shrugged. Don't get used to it. The sun reflected across the lake. Peaceful, uncomplicated, earned, and for the first time since Vanessa Holloway slapped those notices onto my truck, I wasn't thinking about lawsuits, or investigations, or hidden pipelines. I was thinking about something much simpler. The fight was over. Mercer Lake belonged exactly where it always should have, not in the hands of an HOA, not in the hands of a developer, but protected by the truth. And in the end, the truth flowed stronger than any pipeline they ever built.
The lesson I take from this story is simple. Never assume that a piece of paper, a title, or someone speaking with confidence automatically make them right. Eden didn't win because he was louder, richer, or more powerful. He won because he took the time to understand the facts, resurvey the records his grandfather left behind, and let the justice speak for itself. Sometimes the things worth protecting aren't defended by facts. They are protected by patterns, evidence, and the courage to stand your ground when something doesn't feel right. There's also something meaningful about stewardship. It isn't inherent or lack, but what matters most wasn't ownership. It was responsibilities. In the end, the goal wasn't to keep people out. It was to make sure future generations could enjoy something that had nearly been lost to ruin and security. That's a reminder that real strength often looks quiet. It's found in people who stay steady, do the work, and refuse to give up on what matters. Now, I'd love to hear from you. How you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where you have to stand up for what was right, even when the dues feel stuck around you. It's so type yes in the comment, and if you ever learn the value of keeping records and knowing your rights, drop a symbol just type below. And if story like this story about resiliency, common sense, and ordinary people standing firm means something to you, consider subscribing. There are plenty more HOA and land rights stories ahead, and I'll be honored to have you along for the channel.